Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's broadcast of Tap Into the Truth. Welcome. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are and whatever you may be doing. And I really mean that, guys. I gotta tell you, things have gotten crazy. I mean, more so than usual. I find myself actually lamenting how disappointed I am with the level of negativity on social media. Well, hence tonight's title, Not So Social media. There's never been a shortage of vitriol, especially on Facebook in particular, when it comes to conservatives expressing their viewpoints and all the snarky little liberals who have to have their say, and they want to shout you down and call you names and all those lovely things that liberals always do. Or should I say progressives, because let's face facts. In the traditional definition of liberal, those guys, if they truly were a classical liberal, would be just as up in arms about a lot of these things as most conservatives are right now. That being neither here nor there, it has really it's gotten to me, honestly. I've had a very, very unique week. Still getting more and more listens in total. No longer flying under the radar, so to speak, but actually had last Sunday's show delayed, and I ended up broadcasting not from my usual format, so a lot of my usual listeners missed out, and I hope they've had an opportunity to listen and archived. But it's just, I had a protester. Okay, yes, it was just one, which, believe me, this, as ridiculous as that sounds, this person tracked me down to try and stop my show, which I think is relatively, respectful. Every now and then I might get on a roll and maybe get a little harsher than I typically like to do, but my show's pretty tame, and maybe that's part of what made me a target. But yes, a single lone individual made their way from Indiana, of all places. Since legal stuff is still ongoing, I can't go into much more than that, but I found that completely ludicrous, and I guess that's part of what's happened with the spike in weekly plays. I'm no longer flying completely below the radar the way I used to. And the same thing has happened at the Facebook page. I made a post just the other day, and, well, actually, I think it was just yesterday, if I'm remembering correctly, now that I think about it. And where a lot of my posts on the show's webpage, a lot of them get around 100, 150, sometimes 200, not likes and shares and all that, but the reach. I'm counting the reach of the post, which, if you run a specialized type of site, Facebook gives you that information. And I might have a few comments here and there. There'll be a few likes, occasionally a share. But again, I've been flying below the radar, except for folks that are listeners of the show, typically, or personal friends who don't usually listen to the show, strangely enough, because they feel like they get a good enough dose of my brand of conservative commentary without having to listen to the show. And understandable. Although, honestly, I don't do it that much, except every now and then when I get fired up. There's been a little more lately than usual. But I made this one particular post, and we're actually going to discuss the story that post goes with, but this individual ended up getting dozens of comments, and the reach broke 2,000, and part of this was the fact that some liberals came across it first and just started spewing this level of hatred. And then I found that unique and different, and I found myself looking for something positive, and I've been trying all day to find something positive through social media. And other than individual affirmations, individual stories. This just happened. Oh, we just had a baby, or we just got engaged. Happy stuff like that, which is positive, yes, but not news, and certainly not something that folks are getting on board with and making a lot of, hey, blah, blah, this, hey, blah, blah, that. It got me looking even harder and even closer, and I see less and less positive. In fact, it seems like this may be the most divisive I've seen people willing to publicly come out and make statements about, whether it's on Facebook or not. There is a certain level of anonymity on Facebook. People post things on Facebook that they ordinarily wouldn't say face-to-face, in person. Not all of them, but a lot of folks get a lot braver behind a keyboard or behind a microphone, such as what I'm doing right now, than they would in a crowd. People, especially if those people might happen to hold an opinion, politically in particular, different than their own. So I spend a lot of time looking for something positive. I spend a lot of time looking for anything, and I got to tell you, I haven't had a lot of luck. Since the Supreme Court came down with its ruling on same-sex marriage, I've had a ton of people who disagree with me on my feelings towards whether same-sex marriage should ever be accepted, blah, blah, blah. Because, as you know, I'm not against that. I've said it several times. I'm not really for it either. I'm kind of just neutral. In my mind, this isn't really any of my business. Now, I understand the culture warriors who are trying to protect the definition of marriage. And I keep trying to explain to them that we're not talking about religious, spiritual marriage. We're talking about the way the state, as in little s, the government, is trying to define a social union where they defer specialized tax status and in some cases offer some benefits, although usually there's far less benefits and far more penalties for being married in most situations. Now, those civil unions, they want to call it marriage, and people want to insinuate that they then expand that definition. So in my mind, quite simply, as long as you're simply talking about what the state is determining its criteria is for establishing this special tax status, that doesn't affect the church, that doesn't affect religion, that doesn't affect the definition of actual marriage. It's just the state choosing to call it that. So I'm not opposed to that. I'm a firm believer in the ideology of love the sinner, hate the sin. So you don't have to agree with someone and their actions, their activities, their proclivities, but you don't have to be full of hate about it either. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of negative reactions in this, and it has a lot to do with this victory lap that everybody's taking. Barack Obama has the White House done up little gel lights to make it look the color of the rainbow. First of all, it's supposed to be the White House for a reason. It's white because white is the inclusion of all color. When you're talking about physics, talking about the wavelength of the visual spectrum, it's the inclusion of all color. You cannot be everyone's president if you're going to pick a side in such a controversial and divisive issue. But then the occupier has never been interested in being everyone's president anyway. He might talk a good game on occasion, but he's made it very clear that he's not interested in being my president. He's not interested in being anything other than what passes for the guy occupying the White House so he can go play golf on the taxpayer's dime. and keep sending Michelle and the kids off to Europe and who knows where else. In fact, I don't know if anybody's noticed it or not, but Michelle and the daughters and Michelle's mother have all been traveling quite a bit here lately. And oh yes, quite clearly on the taxpayer dime. That's the only way to travel, right? I mean, you get Air Force One, you get great security, you get all kinds of wonderful benefits. I mean, it's better than being in a 5-star hotel. It really is. All the comforts of home, literally. I point this out just because I know not a lot of people have been talking about it. I think it's important that we recognize the fact that they've kind of made a big mess here, and they're not even around to try to help clean it up. Although in their mind they have fought and created a great victory. Which leads back to the question of why is it that the majority of the anger being spewed out online, most of the vitriol, the venom, is coming from people that are on the left. The side that supposedly won, and did win at least this battle in this culture war. And then it occurred to me, well, it's pretty obvious. They know, instinctively, if not consciously, that this fight is far from over. I mean, it doesn't take a constitutional scholar to understand that the majority of the decisions that the Supreme Court laid out this past week, ending on this Monday, required the complete suspension of belief in the Constitution's existence in order to arrive at the decisions they made. The justices know that. Anthony Scalia did everything but say that directly in the majority of the dissents. But the only thing they got right was the case with the EPA, where they said point blank, you know what, you don't actually have carte blanche authority to legislate. My concern is they didn't come out and say, you know what, you don't really have authority to legislate. They should have done that. But all they ended up saying is, oh, by the way, you can't just completely ignore how punitive your regulations are going to be on businesses and industry. You have to take that into account. You cannot intentionally try to bankrupt somebody just because they're in a industry you don't approve of. Which this was an effort to try and undo the damage being done by targeting the coal industry, primarily. So they got that one right. They then turn right back around and mess up the voter ID law. And I'm not prepared to talk about that. I'm not prepared to. By Sunday, I should be ready to discuss it. But right now, I'm still trying to get my head around it. I'm going to have to read the decision a couple more times. Going to have to read the dissents, and I'm really going to have to get it in my head exactly what the deal was going on there. But I mean, there was a lot of things that happened in the last week with this Supreme Court, with decisions that they released that just don't make sense. Not the least of which is how we're still talking about the 14th Amendment establishing same-sex marriage throughout all 50 states. Using the principle of equal protection under the law, which, the 14th Amendment, again, I will remind everyone, was designed to make sure that the former Confederate states, as they were forced back into the Union, we're mentioning the Confederacy right now without even talking about the battle flag. Isn't that cute? We'll get there in a second. I'm about done talking about it.